Hey everybody, welcome back. We are going to talk about A Few Good Men today. We are going to go over the basic plot, and I'm going to show you how the 10 plot points are present in this classic film. All right, welcome to this month's story breakdown. We are going to be talking about A Few Good Men. This is one of my favorite movies, and so I was kind of excited to get to do this. I will say that almost as soon as I decided this was going to be the topic for this month, it sort of disappeared from most of the streaming services. So I'm sorry about that. It used to be on Netflix. It used to be on Amazon Prime on like the free, Tubi and some of the free apps. And now I don't think it is anymore. So if you don't already have access to it, you are either going to have to wait for it to show up on one of those again, or you can buy it on Prime if you want. And I actually own it. I own this digital copy of it just because it's one of my favorite films, but that's going to be completely up to you. So I'm sorry. I try to use stories that are more available through streaming services so that people don't have to pay for them. But like I said, as soon as I sat down to do this one, I got on to see where I could find it so I could tell you guys where to go, and it had disappeared. But like a week before that, it was on the free Amazon Prime app. So anyway, we're going to move forward with it anyway, and hopefully if you're watching this down the road, it will have reappeared somewhere. Things kind of move in and out of different services, so I'm sure it will at some point. Anyway, okay, so let's get going on the story breakdown. The basic story, again, I'm hoping that you have watched it or are familiar, because we are going to be doing spoilers here. So just to let you know, if you don't want spoilers, then turn this off and go watch the movie and then come back to it afterward, okay? We have to discuss the ending if we're going to discuss all of the elements of story right around this. So, all right, here we go. The basic story is this. A Marine dies tragically during a hazing incident at the Marine base down at Guantanamo Bay. Two other Marines, Dawson and Downey, were hazing that Marine, and he had an undiagnosed heart condition. The hazing resulted in his death, and the two Marines are now charged with murder. A military lawyer, Daniel Kaffee, who is played by Tom Cruise, is infamous for never seeing the inside of a courtroom. He always makes deals, like plea bargains, and settles out of court. And he is assigned to defend these two Marines. And it turns into a courtroom case as the story progresses about justice, truth, cover-ups, and misuse of power. In the end, Kaffee gets Colonel Jessup, who is played by Jack Nicholson, to admit that he gave the order for the hazing, which was called a Code Red. So the two Marines are acquitted on the serious charges. They are, however, found guilty of conduct unbecoming a U.S. Marine and kicked out of the military. So we can talk about this more as we go along, but this is the basic gist of it. And of course, this is the really, really famous end courtroom scene with Jack Nicholson's "You can't handle the truth" line, right? That's what this film is known for. But it really is quite the study in really good storytelling. So I'm going to do the breakdown from the 10 universal plot points that will help you get an idea of pacing. And also, one thing that I don't say a lot about the 10 universal plot points that I want to start reiterating is that they actually are a part of transformational human psychology. They're very high level, so they're very non-specific, and they focus more on the plot than they do on the internal arc. And, we kind of think of transformational human psychology as the internal arc, but the basic, the just very general structure of story, like that, that story graph we were all introduced to in grade school that just kind of shows the curve from the inciting incident, and then it kind of goes up to the top corner of the page and it shows the rising action, and then you hit the climactic moment, and then you see falling action. Even that is just a very, very, very high level of transformational human psychology. I mean, of course it is, because story structure is based on the way that we all go through change, right? So the 10 universal plot points, they are used mostly for pacing, to give you an idea of where and when different elements should happen in the story, but they at least hint at the transformational human psychology, right? Okay, so let's go through these and the way I broke it down. In the world before, we really have kind of two sides of this. We have Kaffee, the main character, and his internal arc, and then we have what's going on in the case with Dawson and Downey, right? So in the world before, Kaffee is a lawyer. He's actually very successful, but he's never tried a case in a courtroom before. And then we have Dawson and Downey, who are accused of murder. The intro of conflict, we see Galloway. She is played by Demi Moore. She petitions her superiors to get assigned to Dawson and Downey's case. This is right at the beginning of the film. She wants to be their lawyer. This is how the writers set the stage for the audience. In this scene, she explains to her her superiors what happened. We kind of get an idea of what the stakes are, and we're even introduced to the phrase code red, and so that we know what it means. And that's going to end up being a real important and triggering phrase throughout the rest of the story, right? So we can kind of see that while things haven't really started to happen yet, this is setting the stage and giving us an idea of what the framework for the story is going to be. Okay, the call to adventure is when Caffey himself is actually assigned to the case instead of Galloway. She does end up kind of getting herself assigned as co-counsel, but you can see that that's the call to adventure because this is when the story really kicks off, when he takes over the case and, okay, now we have to start talking to our clients and doing investigating. So that's really when the story begins. The early escalation, once again, many escalations early on that could qualify as escalations, right? Many events. Them meeting their clients for the first time. We see Jessup and Kendrick on the base interacting with Markinson. I mean, there's a lot of different things and there's a lot of tension in a lot of those scenes. But the reason that I chose this one is that it has all the earmarks of the early story escalation. Okay, so they go to Guantanamo to investigate and question Colonel Jessup. If you have a great idea for a story premise, but you don't know where you're going with it, if you're having a really hard time filling in plot events or finishing your current WIP, or if you're constantly worried that your story is boring or dragging or that your readers won't like it, then I encourage you to join the Legendary Fiction Forge, my monthly membership for fiction authors. Inside, I will give you the complete A to Z blueprint for how to write highly emotional stories that your readers will absolutely fall in love with, no matter what your genre or tropes are. Want to become a widely read, highly paid master storyteller? Then join us in the Legendary Fiction Forge and finally get that epic story that's been knocking around in your brain forever out to the world. Some important points here so that you can understand why I chose this. Something starts to feel deeply amiss when Jessup demands Caffey respect him by asking nicely for a copy of the transfer order. Now, that request by Caffey is very run-of-the-mill. It's just like, I just need the paperwork to prove what you're saying. You know, any investigator would ask for that. But it shows a lot of tension and that Jessup kind of freaks out. He kind of melts down when he's asked for proof of his version of events. So that starts to feel like, ooh, what's going on here, right? And the other thing is that Jessup is basically the villain for this story. And so the entire early story escalation has the protagonist face to face with the villain and being on his turf at his base, right? So if you go back to last month's lesson about how very often you come face to face with a secondary villain in the early story escalation, this is similar to that, except it's not a secondary villain, it's the villain. This is them getting to know him. Now, he's not, for the most part, being openly villainous to them. He's putting up this front of, I'm an awesome guy and I'm going to cooperate with you and I'm going to tell the truth. But when he gets really snooty with Caffey about, you're going to ask me nicely, and really demeans him and calls him names and everything, that's his true villainy showing through. So we get a little bit of a hint of it. And maybe if we want to go a little bit higher level, that's really what we're looking for in the early story escalation, is a hint of the villainy. It's not the full villainy on display. So whether it's a secondary villain or a minion of the villain, like the Dark Riders or orcs or goblins or whatever, stormtroopers, right? Or the villain himself, the point is the full villainy is not on display here, but we're getting hints of it. We're seeing that there's something darker beneath the surface that we don't fully understand yet, okay? So there's your early story escalation. The turning point is when Caffey makes the decision to try the case in court. So before this, everyone, like the prosecution, the military, are leaning on him to settle the case out of court and to make a deal. But this is where he decides that, number one, he is going to take the case to trial, and two, that he will definitely be their lawyer, because before this, he kept trying to get out of it, trying to get another lawyer assigned. He didn't want to do it. He was very hesitant. And Joe Galloway, Demi Moore's character, fights hard for him to stay and just says, they need you. You are the only one that are going to be able to successfully prove they didn't do this, So that's a big turning point, because he goes from trying to get out of it and just sort of half-heartedly doing the investigation to, okay, I am all in, and now we need to sit down and figure out how we are going to successfully defend these guys, right? The late escalation is pretty obvious because they have a lot of things layered on top of each other that come to a head. The first is when they find out that Downey did not actually hear the order, which greatly discredits their defense. So again, the details of this, if you've seen the film, it will make sense. They were operating under the assumption that both men heard the order directly from their commanding officer. And because that's what their clients told them, and their clients weren't entirely truthful with them, they then find out that one of the two was not in the room and didn't hear the order be given. And that really undermines their whole case. It makes them look really idiotic and like they don't know what they're talking about. And at the same time, their one and only really strong witness, Markinson, commits suicide. So obviously he can't testify anymore. They have just lost their entire defense. So it's this major discouraging moment. It's where Kathy, Tom Cruise's character, gets drunk and yells at Joe, and just everything is falling apart. On top of that, it's pouring rain outside, which just adds to kind of the feel of the scene and how bad things have gotten. So they really think at this point their case is smashed and their clients are going to prison. This is a really good example. If you're in Fiction by Design, I talk about how on the internal arc especially, we get dark forces pushing back after the turning point. And this is a really good example of that. They have so many things pushing back that it just becomes really, really devastating to what they're trying to accomplish. All right, so then the climactic moment is obviously Kathy, Tom Cruise, versus Jessup, who's played by Jack Nicholson, in the courtroom. I mean, I don't have to tell you that. Obviously, that is the climax of the movie. The stakes are very high because not only are they trying to catch him in a lie, which is going to be tricky no matter how you slice it, but their clients' lives and very freedom depends on them getting this admission from the colonel, right? And furthermore, if it doesn't work and it just looks like they're randomly accusing a high-ranking officer of lying, the lawyers, all three of them, could be court-martialed, kicked out of the military, disbarred, and possibly even imprisoned. So, we could say that this is a really good example of stakes that are not literally life and death stakes. I always say that you need, quote unquote, death stakes at the end, but it doesn't have to be literal or physical death. It can be the death of a relationship, the death of a reputation, the death of a business, anything like that. It can be more emotional or psychological. And this is a really good example of that because obviously, no matter which way the court case goes, no one is going to die because of it. But we could be talking about them losing their careers, their reputations, and possibly their freedom if they were to be court-martialed and have to go to jail for that. So these are, you really don't get too much higher of stakes than this unless it actually was physical life and death stakes, right? So that's the climactic moment when he faces off verbally, really, against Jack Nicholson's character, Jessup. So I actually identified two different uber despair and aha moments. And really, it's because one of them is more based around Kathy, and the other one is more based around Jessup in the case. So the first one, for the uber despair, is the moment that it looks like Kathy might not press for the confession from Jessup. So right before they go into court, Joe Galloway says, if it doesn't look like he's going to say it and you don't think you can get it, then back away because, you could get in a lot of trouble if it doesn't work, right? So it comes to this moment where he's hesitating and you can tell he's trying to decide. And, because he hesitates for so long and doesn't ask a question, Jessup excuses himself from the witness stand with a really flippant comment and a flippant attitude. And it really looks like he won. And if he does win, then their clients are going to prison for murder, right? This is also for anyone who's, maybe attended my workshop on how to write characters that jump off the page. This is also the reflective moment for Kathy. I always say that this moment is always very subtle in film because it's so internal that it's difficult to show on the screen, right? There's a few films, a few TV shows that do it really well, but not many. But this actually, it's not as good as others because we don't know what he's thinking exactly, but you can see that this is him reflecting. He pauses, he looks at his clients, he looks at his co-counsel, he looks at the jury, he looks at opposing counsel. You can see that his mind is working and he's going over everything that's happened and everything he knows, and he's trying to decide if he's going to step back, which would be failing his clients, or if he'll live up to his father's reputation, which I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And that would mean taking the bold tactic, trying to get the confession from Jessup and risking everything, right? So this is his reflective moment. And we do see it just in a single pause that he has on screen. And it's very, very intense. So I do think that it's well done in this film. But without knowing what the reflective moment is, you probably wouldn't recognize that. If you have a great idea for a story premise, but you don't know where you're going with it, if you're having a really hard time filling in plot events or finishing your current WIP, or if you're constantly worried that your story is boring or dragging or that your readers won't like it, then I encourage you to join the Legendary Fiction Forge, my monthly membership for fiction authors. Inside, I will give you the complete A to Z blueprint for how to write highly emotional stories that your readers will absolutely fall in love with, no matter what your genre or tropes are. Want to become a widely read, highly paid master storyteller? Then join us in the Legendary Fiction Forge and finally get that epic story that's been knocking around in your brain forever out to the world. Okay, so that in this case, for this first little climactic bit that I identified, the aha moment is when he just says, sit down, I'm not done questioning you yet. So this is him making a decision to move forward, right? So that's kind of the aha moment. So like I said, this is Kathy's climactic moment based on his inner arc, but you could alternately argue that there's a second climactic moment when he's actively trying to get the confession from Jessup. For that one, the uber despair would be when Jessup refuses to confess and he comes up with this snide but very loquacious explanation for all of Kathy's questions and discontinuities. So it's when he says, you know, I'll answer the question, and then he goes off on this tirade about how, you use as a punchline what I use as a code of honor, and in places you don't talk about at parties, you want me defending your country. You know, when he goes on this whole tirade like that, because it seems that Kathy has failed to get that confession from him, and he has retained the upper hand, and again, that he's going to win, and their clients are going to go to jail, right? And at this point, Kathy can't take it back. He's already made the accusation, so he's kind of all in here. And then, of course, the most climactic moment of probably the whole film is when Kathy gets in his face and is pretty much screaming, did you order the code red? The aha here comes when Jessup finally admits that he did. So remember, the aha is very often them realizing how they're going to win and then putting it into action. So the second that Jessup admits that, Kathy has won, right? That's how they win for themselves so that they don't get court-martialed, right? And on behalf of their clients to prove that they did not do this against direct orders, but they were actually ordered to do this. So this is how you take down the villain in this story, which is Jessup. So the resolution is Dawson and Downey are acquitted for murder, but they are still charged with that conduct on becoming a U.S. Marine and dishonorably discharged. And I do think that that's a fitting ending, because if they, I think what the writers were going for here is that if they'd been, totally cleared of all charges, then the story would not have addressed the immorality of hazing. This shows that they wouldn't be prosecuted criminally because they were following a direct order from their superior, but it also showed that there were still consequences for doing something immoral that victimized another human being, even if you were ordered to do it. In terms of Kathy and his resolution, what he accomplished here lived up to, if not exceeded, his father's fame. So he stepped into his own superpower as a lawyer. And of course, now he's finally tried a case in court. So both of those things are opposite circumstances from what they were at the beginning when we started with the world before. He had never tried a case. And then, you had these guys being accused of murder. By the end, he had tried a case. He'd become a really good lawyer. And they had been acquitted, right? So you can kind of see the symmetry there. Now, authors take notice. These are things that are kind of little lessons I want you to pull out of this film that I noticed that I just really liked about how they did these things. The first is that the dialogue here is just absolutely superb. And this, if you didn't know, this was actually based on a play, and that's probably why the dialogue is so good. Plays are always all about the dialogue. If you pay attention to the way plays are structured, the characters actually say what they feel and say what they're doing a lot of the times, which sounds funny, but it's because, back in whenever Shakespeare's day, when people were seeing plays, you can be really far away from the stage and can't always see what they're doing. But if they're enunciating and speaking loudly enough, then you can hear them, right? And so they would say what is happening as it's happening. Anyway, so this was based on a play, and that's probably why the dialogue is so good. What I want you to notice is, first of all, let's look at the famous "you can't handle the truth" line, right? I was really trying to break this line down, and what Kathy is saying is he's basically demanding the truth, right? Before this, saying, you know, I want the truth, give me the truth, tell me the truth, all of that. And you would think, like, the thing that would make the most sense would be for Jessup to either say yes or no. You know, like, I want the truth. No, I'm not going to give you the truth. Or yes, okay, here's the truth, right? So you would almost think a yes or no answer to a certain extent would be the most logical thing, but that's not what Jessup does. He answers with why he's not going to give the truth, because he doesn't think that anyone can handle it. And this is actually a hallmark of really good dialogue. You don't want them to usually say exactly what they mean. You want them to, I almost want to say, use metaphors. You kind of talk around it, use metaphors, you find some, you know, sleight of hand when it comes to verbally speaking to make the audience infer the meaning rather than just telling them the meaning. So if you're using, if your dialogue is telling the audience something directly, like saying exactly what the character means, that's on par with telling rather than showing. How you show with dialogue is to say something indirectly so that the audience has to infer the meaning. And this is what he does here. He doesn't say yes or no. That would be telling. He says, you can't handle the truth. And that makes, I mean, that is a no, right? The audience infers the no, but they're not telling us the no. They're telling us why. So they're giving us a lot more information than they could if they just said yes or no. And like I said, this is really good dialogue. You are forcing the audience to think and to come up with meaning and figure out what Jessup's meaning is on their own, okay? And that's going to create a much more powerful scene than just telling them what he means, all right? So that's number one, and they do that all throughout this movie. It's really, really good dialogue. The other thing that I want you to pay attention to, if you can, is there is a scene where Galloway and Weinberg are the two lawyers who are helping Kathy. So Galloway is Demi Moore's character, and Weinberg is the other guy. I'm sorry, I do not know the actor's name in real life. I could look it up. His name's Sam, though, Sam Weinberg. And they have this scene where they both ask the other one why they either love or hate their clients. So you get the feeling definitely throughout the story that Sam Weinberg is not happy to be on this case. He is not happy to be defending these guys. And Demi Moore doesn't like that. She's very much in her client's corner. She very much wants to help them. So they have this argument after one of the court sessions where she says, why do you hate them so much? And the basic gist is that Weinberg is sympathizing with the victim, which is completely understandable, right? Like, we should be sympathizing with the victim. This poor guy went through a hazing incident that killed him, and it was probably horrible and torturous, and it was awful, right? So he's just saying these guys hazed someone because they didn't like him and they killed him. They were beating on someone who was weaker than them, and he doesn't like that. He has a ton of sympathy for the victim, which is totally understandable. Then he turns to her and says, why do you like them so much? And her answer is basically because they're Marines, because they protect our country, because you know, then there's the fact that it's really crappy to tell a Marine that you have to follow an order no matter what. And then when they do follow the order, you throw them in prison. You know, it's not fair to do that. And these are guys who are willing to protect their country. So number one, first of all, they do a really good job with showing all sides of an issue and making all sides really sympathetic. Like, I understand both sides of that argument. I really do. And so it's not black and white. It's very sticky, the situation that they've gotten themselves into. And that's what makes for a really riveting work of fiction, right? You've got to get the audience thinking about these things. So we can take a lesson from that. But once again, too, they aren't telling you exactly what they mean. So when I just explained that scene to you, I was telling you what they said. She basically said she respects them as Marines. He basically said he didn't like them because they were bullies. But they don't say that in the scene, right? That's just me summarizing. So I was telling you that, not showing you. The way that they show it in the scene is through emotion. and through the conclusions that the characters are coming to, right? So we have Sam talking about these guys saying, and he gets really upset, right? And he says, why did they kill him? Because he couldn't run fast enough. I mean, this is his feelings about it and his emotional outbursts. And by doing that, again, it's really good dialogue because the emotion is there. And because it's not saying, oh, I don't like them because they were bullies. It's him putting emotion and putting meaning into that and putting the experience of the victim into that, right? And that makes it so much more powerful. And then when Demi Moore's character answers, she actually answers in the voice of the Marines, which I mean, I had to actually kind of deconstruct this before I realized that she did that. And it's really interesting. She says, and I am paraphrasing, I don't have this memorized or anything, but she says something like, because I don't remember how she starts, something about them standing guard over the country. And she says, and they say, nothing's going to hurt you tonight, not on my watch. And so she's speaking with the voice of the Marine. And you see how that is so much more compelling than her just saying, well, I respect them and what happened wasn't fair. So I just want you to take notice of that and how good the dialogue is here. If you can watch this over and over and really deconstruct the dialogue and figure out how they did that and what they're doing, that will really help you up your dialogue a lot. We go into this in a lot more detail in Fiction by Design as well, in the module about dialogue if you want more help with that, okay? The other thing that I want to draw your attention to in this film is that this is one where they reveal the internal arc through dialogue and conversation, and there are no flashbacks, no backstory is ever seen throughout the film. So when I was doing the 10 plot points, I kept mentioning Caffey's father, right? That is his internal conflict. That is his limiting belief. It talks about various times throughout the film that his father, and it's actually not what you would consider a negative thing. His father didn't beat him. His father wasn't abusive. His father was a great trial lawyer, like fantastic trial lawyer. So much so that he's famous in the military and even in law schools. So we hear people extolling his father's virtues. You can tell he was a very moral man. They talk at one point about him defending a little Black girl's right to go to an all-white school. So he was challenging the status quo back when there was a lot more racism than, maybe there is everywhere now. And Sam, who's the Tom Cruise's co-counsel, even says that he wrote a paper, like a thesis, about his father when he was in law school. So that's how famous he is. He's heroic to people. And you definitely get the sense that the reason Caffey hasn't wanted to get into a courtroom is because he is in his father's shadow. He doesn't think he's going to be able to live up to it. And he very much cared what his father thought. There's a scene where he's talking to Sam and he says, do you think my father would have put this person on the stand? And Sam immediately goes, don't do that. Don't do the comparison thing. That's not going to serve you, But you can see through the way he reacts and the way they talk about things, what his insecurities are. So this is a really good example of the internal arc is there, but they don't show it with flashbacks. They show it through his reactions to things. They show it through dialogue and conversation. There is even a scene where his opposing counsel, who is played by Kevin Bacon, makes a comment about his father, and it's a very mean-spirited comment. And Tom Cruise freaks out and screams at him and swears at him, so you can see by people's reactions, especially what triggers them, what their insecurities are. And they do such a good job of showing that in this film. So if you want to figure out how to show your backstory or how to show your internal dialogue without, quote unquote, showing it on the page, study this story, study this film, because that's what they do here. Okay. So those are the things that I wanted you to take away that I really like about how they handled in this film. All right, so now I'll hop over to the next training and we'll get into how to write a scene where you catch someone in a lie. Okay, guys, thanks for being here with me today. If you are interested in learning more about A Few Good Men, the mini lessons that I give to people inside the Forge for this film includes how to catch a character in a lie. So we're going to analyze everything they did, how they kind of caught him with his own words, and how you can apply that to your story. If that's something you are interested in for your WIP, join us inside the Legendary Fiction Forge. The link is in the caption. Thanks for being with me today, and have a wonderful week of writing.